The border standoff with China entering its 32nd day today, Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar briefed MPs on the Parliamentary Committee for External Affairs, admitting that China was being unusually aggressive in its public statements. But he said that the effort was on to engage them diplomatically. Sources, however, say that foreign capitals are concerned and worried by the border row.
Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar briefing members of Parliament's Standing Committee for Foreign Affairs on the standoff with China. The meeting lasted for over 2 hours, in which 20 MPs, including Rahul Gandhi, asked Mr. Jaishankar questions. Sources say the Foreign Secretary told the MPs that unlike in the past, China has been aggressively articulating these issues in the public domain, and that efforts are on to engage China diplomatically and maintain status quo. That there is a take a deep breath, stop and engage approach being applied here. Rahul Gandhi asked if this was an attempt by China to intimidate Bhutan, while Mamata Banerjee's comments on China interfering in Bengal was also raised. The Foreign Secretary reportedly then told the TMC member to convey to Mamata Banerjee that such statements don't help. The Foreign Secretary's briefing to MPs come on a day when diplomatic sources from key Western nations told NDTV that they are concerned about the border standoff. Sources say the Ministry of External Affairs has briefed individual foreign missions in Delhi at their request and emphasized that diplomatic channels are being used to try and de-escalate the situation. But what has worried other countries is a briefing by China to foreign missions in Beijing last week, where they said their patience with India was not indefinite. The Chinese Foreign Ministry today said India had trespassed into China and that many foreign missions in Beijing were shocked by the events. They also said that India should not use the trespass as a tool to attain political goals. Meanwhile, an op-ed in a Chinese state-run daily said that if India stirs up conflict in several spots, it must face the consequence of an all-out confrontation with China along the entire line of actual control, or LAC. Over a month into the standoff with China, the conflict has shown no signs of ending soon and could well end up being a long drawn-out row. With Nidhi Razdan in New Delhi, Sandeep Phukan, NDTV.
Well, the question is whether the government's approach to China is working. Remember, it is China that has been having almost daily press briefings attacking India. India maintaining a studied silence except for one statement that was made in between. So there seems to be a clear thinking and strategy here on how to pursue this with Beijing. Joining us on the program tonight, we have the spokesperson of the BJP, Mr. Krishna Sagar Rao, Manish Tiwari, spokesperson of the Congress and also member of the Atlantic Council, former diplomat, Mr. Vivek Karju is here with us, Mr. Jaydev Ranade is back with us from the Center for China Analysis and Strategy. And I'd like to begin tonight with General V.P. Malik, the former Chief of Army Staff, who joins us this evening as well. General Malik, to you first, sir. What do you make of this as we enter 32 days, we complete 32 days of this standoff? Do you think that this is something that could actually be very protracted and go on for many months?
Look, whatever is happening is quite unusual, because I don't think we have come across for many years since '62 this kind of aggression diplomatically and in the media, and the kind of threatening language that has been used by China. The dispute is not new. The dispute is very old, and in fact it is the status quo that has been disturbed by China which has caused the present problem. Yes, it can carry on this front. I don't see military confrontation coming apart, because it's, you see, the diplomatic space has already shrunk so much, and every day's briefing that is being done by Beijing, it is shrinking the diplomatic space further. So I think we have to consider it to be that it will take a long time for us to resolve this whole issue. I hope it is not done militarily, and it is resolved diplomatically only. But one has to be prepared for everything today.
Well, that's very important coming from you, sir, because you're not ruling out a possible military confrontation, which was my next question. You're saying that the diplomatic space has shrunk. You're saying that the rhetoric is unusually aggressive from their side, but you don't rule out the possibility of the militaries getting involved.
No, I don't rule it out. Under such circumstances, it is better to be prepared and it is better to, you don't have to be aggressive in this, but you can't be caught napping, definitely not.
Well, I think it's very significant, Ambassador Vivek Karju, for former Chief Army Staff like General Malik to say that. As a diplomat, you would know that at this time the MEA is obviously working overtime to douse the excitement, the alarm that has been created, certainly in sections of the media as well, and trying to re-emphasize, as it has to everybody, that diplomatic channels are at work. What do you make of General Malik's comments?
I think as a military man, General or a former military man, General Malik is perfectly right in saying that the army has to be at all times prepared for any eventuality. Having said that, I do think that the government's approach is correct. In a sober and patient way, it is trying to convey to the Chinese that while India will hold its position, it doesn't want this matter to flare up. Now, the Chinese are behaving, as is obvious, in a very aggressive and in an unusually aggressive way, and that is what, according to you, the Foreign Secretary has also told the Standing Committee of Parliament. In a manner of speaking, I think the Chinese are testing our nerve as a nation. They are used to dealing with countries on their periphery in a certain manner. They sent out signals that they are clearly numero uno in Asia, and that they are in the same bracket as the Americans. And their aggression here is part of their overall aggressiveness. We've got to be just patient. But I don't think that there is any question of our resiling from our position. And as far as the Chinese statement that India is trespassing on its territory, Bhutan is on record as saying that that is part of its territory, Dokla, and that the Chinese have transgressed understandings that are there between China and Bhutan with regard to how these issues
You said a couple of important things. A, that they're testing our nerve. There's no question of resiling, and that the Indian government is dealing with it in the best way possible at the moment. Mr. Ranade, do you agree, or do you believe what General Malik seems to be suggesting, that this is not an ordinary situation? This is not like a border standoff that we've seen in the past. There's something more here, and that the diplomatic space actually has shrunk quite a bit.
Well, you asked two questions here, so let me first say, is it unusual, is it different? Certainly it is. It's not a normal border standoff that we have seen. This time the accompanying rhetoric and the signaling that Beijing has been doing is certainly, it has raised the ante, and the manner in which they have gone public has shrunk the space for diplomatic negotiation. There is another point here, the Chinese insistence right through that Doklam is their territory. And they have now started saying that we have committed, their diplomats called it a surgical strike, now they are saying we are trespassing into China. In other words, they are trying to legalize their claim that this is their territory. About where it will go, frankly it is difficult to say. It could go either way. But right now, from what I am seeing, the kind of messaging that China is doing, the exercises that they have had, these are not good signs. And yet, the diplomatic briefing that they have given in Beijing is obviously intended to be conveyed to us that, as they said, their patience is running out. But on our side, I am glad that we are standing firm. We are not caving in, because the Chinese assessment has been that India lacks the political courage to stand up. So I think what hopefully will happen is some kind of a arrangement being worked out, a modus vivendi, where both walk away with their prestige intact, and in this case I dare say that China has more to lose, since it styles itself as a global power almost on par with the United States.
Manish, I know that one of the positive things in all of this that has emerged in the past few days is that the opposition and the government are really speaking more in one voice, particularly on China, and that's encouraging. Having said that, in your assessment, do you believe that the government is sort of handling this in the best possible way? Today foreign diplomats I spoke to here are extremely concerned, despite the briefings they've got from the government of India that this is being handled diplomatically. They are worried about what's going on with China. So the messaging for them is that this is a far more serious situation than we're willing to let on.
Well, Nidhi, as I understand it, this has everything to do with the One Belt, One Road conference. The fact is that Bhutan is the only country which actually stood with us in boycotting the conference, and therefore the Chinese, have decided to go after the Bhutanese. And it is important, not only in this context, but to send out a message to our friends that India, when called upon, actually stands by those countries with which it has a special relationship. So therefore, having said that, it is also important that we try and ensure that this does not escalate. And the Chinese obviously are interested in intimidating us, in trying to browbeat us. And so therefore, as a country, we need to stand firm, because if you look at the entire Chinese conduct in a context, except for India and Bhutan, they've sorted out their land boundary issues with all their other neighbors. Only India and Bhutan are left. Even in the South China Sea, between 99 and 2000, they sorted out Gulf of Tonkin with Vietnam. But the other South China Sea disputes, with Philippines, with Vietnam, and other countries still linger. So therefore, obviously, the Chinese are not interested in resolving the border issue with India, for whatever reason. And they are, in this particular instance, very miffed that Bhutan decided to stand with India, when everybody else attended the One Belt, One Road conference. Otherwise, there is no reason for this escalation in the central sector, which the Chinese call the middle sector, which has otherwise been quiet.
Well, another issue, Mr. Rao, that came up in today's briefing that the Foreign Secretary had for the Standing Committee on External Affairs was when the issue of Mamata Banerjee raising this concern about China's interference in West Bengal, that came up. And at that point, we believe the Foreign Secretary did tell the TMC MP to convey to her that such statements actually don't help. And she's not the only one who's raised this issue of Chinese interference in Bengal. You have Mehbooba Mufti, the Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, who is your ally, who has said a similar thing about Kashmir. Has the BJP sort of been able to convey to these two Chief Ministers about why these statements are being made? It's extremely unusual at this time when you have this serious standoff of two sitting Chief Ministers, including one allied to the ruling party, to say this.
First things first, I think the government has given an assurance it is fully engaged with China diplomatically and using all dimensions as touch points to ensure that the escalation doesn't happen. And the briefings are happening, last week also there was an all-party meeting and there was a briefing, and even today there was a briefing by the Secretary. So I think Indian government is doing everything it can to maintain the status quo and ensure that things come back to normal. Partially, there is some imaginary escalation because it is the broadcasting media, which is also state-run there, which is escalating tensions, and actual border standoff remains at this point of time at a status quo.
But what about the Chief Ministers?
Which is extremely important, as you have raised about the states complaining. States are complaining because there is activity at the border. Yes. Yeah, they're complaining because there is actually some activity at the border. And see, we had historically the highs and lows in this bilateral, bilateral relationships with China. This is historic. This is not now. If you root it back, it is since 1950. It is 62, 67, 87, 2003, 2006, 2013. We had skirmishes, we had issues, we had a war. So this is not new, but at the same time, I think we need to have restraint. We are two giants, as neighbors, and I don't think anyone wants war here or anyone wants military engagement here. We have almost $80 billion of a trade in between us, and China, I think, is, as much as I analyze, China is testing the strength of the India-China policy. It is also a little unsettled and jived because of the economic activity at the South China Sea, and India being a little bit of a part in there, and also the geopolitical equation changing with proximity to America, United States with India. and it's a newfound partner, Pakistan, trying to foment trouble to India through its I think its hotline with China. So India will do what Indian government will do what it has to resolve this issue.
Well, obviously,
Bharatiya Janata Party has full confidence in.
It would. I just want to ask General Malik a point that former Foreign Secretary Sham Saran actually made a few weeks ago when he wrote, it's the first time that Indian forces are engaged with China from the soil of a third country. Tell us, sir, how does that complicate this situation even more?
Look, we have special relations with Bhutan. Bhutan is unable to defend its territory, and there is an assurance given by India that it will defend its territory. I mean, it's quite simple as that. We've had special relations, and even the diplomatic talks that they have with China, they keep us informed about. So the point is that for all practical purposes, we have to defend them. What is at stake is our credibility. Our credibility being a good neighbor, our credibility to be a stabilizer in this whole area, our credibility to come to the assistance of a neighbor which is very small as compared to China. There is so much at stake. It's not just the Siliguri corridor. I'm not worried too much about Siliguri corridor as I'm worried about the special relations which India has maintained with Bhutan for such a long time. So if we have to fight in the so-called, as you are saying, third territory, well, it's not only that, because that fight will escalate to both sides, to the Indian border as well. It's such a narrow place there that is bound to escalate to either side of the Chumbi Valley. And the other thing is that, Siliguri, I don't really, there is no threat, conventional threat, but what worries one is that they can exploit the communal problem that we keep having sometimes in that corridor, or the ethnic problem that we keep having. They can exploit it if they come and establish themselves with the road that they are trying to construct. So there are many things at stake today, not just the Siliguri corridor, but I think quite important is the Indo-Bhutan relations that we have maintained for such a long time.
I think that's very significant what you're saying. I'd like to ask though on what India's options are moving ahead as we go into last comments. Manish Tiwari, what do you think India can do diplomatically, apart from, of course, engaging with China at one level, but seeing the rhetoric coming from there? There was a journalist visit to Tibet that was cancelled. I know of someone who was meant to travel to Tibet on a tourist visa, and that has suddenly been, denied at the last minute. So, they are sort of gently turning the screws on us in ways that they can. What do you think India can do as well?
Well, Nidhi, let me caveat my caution by saying that all of us stand as one insofar as this particular issue is concerned, and I agree with General Malik, and I had made that point earlier about a special relationship with Bhutan. But having said that, I think we need to be cautious. For the first time, possibly after a long time, you are looking at a two-front situation. The relationship with the United States should not be really taken for granted, because you have a completely dysfunctional Washington DC, which does not know its nose from its elbow. Unfortunately, because we've not been able to finish the Asian power dynamic, you've almost lost the special relationship that you had with Russia all along. So therefore, if I was, to advise the government of India, I would say that we need to be cautious, we need to be restrained. And I think it is in everybody's interest, as the BJP spokesperson was also pointing out, that we have a greater level of bilateral trade with China than we do with the United States of America. I think the Chinese number is $90 billion, while the US number is $70 billion. So therefore, we should try and see to the best extent possible, given the geopolitical environment and the fact that, the Chinese don't need to act themselves, but they can actually ask the proxy, Pakistan, to go to keep on creating trouble. So given the regional context, I think it will be in our interest to tread cautiously. We need to build capacity, but try and sort it out diplomatically.
Ambassador Karju, your suggestions. What can we do that can quietly hurt them? Gentle pricks.
I think as of now, we are trying a policy of being reasonable, of trying to convey that India at no stage is willing to give up its credibility either in the neighborhood or beyond. However, if the aggression continues, then we will have very seriously to think of options. And what is encouraging, and this is a positive signal, a very positive signal that will be conveyed to the Chinese, that India is one, that while the political class is normally fractious, on this matter, I am deeply encouraged by both the spokesmen of the BJP and the Congress of acting together. And I do hope that when this matter comes up in Parliament, the same message will go, because I do think that at the end of the day, the Chinese are perhaps relying on India losing its nerve, that the government thinking of options, because there won't be support. Once they see that there is this national support, of course, diplomatically, quietly, but we will have to be active, and perhaps other countries, once we are diplomatically active, other countries will step in too to caution China, because believe me, no one wants a flare up between India and China. Our position too is fairly good internationally.
Well, Mr. Ranade, let me ask you, how seriously should we believe then op-eds in state-run Chinese media? Like today, you have the Global Times talking about this becoming a full-blown confrontation on the line of actual control. How seriously should we take these op-eds? And the Chinese media has been so belligerent in the last few weeks.
Well, Chinese media has virtually talked about dismembering India.
Yeah.
I mean, the way they have gone on about Kashmir, Sikkim, Bhutan, etc. I think we need to understand that what the Chinese media says, official media, including the Global Times, which is a subsidiary of the People's Daily and whose editor is the deputy editor of the People's Daily, that they have clearance at some level. But the Global Times does exaggerate the party position or the government's position. So that is how we should look at it. May not be in its entirety, but what we should look at really are the People's Daily and Xinhua. And what we are seeing is other state-owned media also, like CCTV. They have also signaled that things can move in a more, shall I say, negative direction or hostile direction. So I personally would feel concerned about the situation as it is. But I think the way we are trying to handle it, we are trying to handle it diplomatically, trying to keep things cool. I think that is the way to do it, and the united stand that everyone has taken is something that would disappoint China, if I may say. But we should keep our powder dry.
I agree with Jaydev, but there is one point which struck me, that yesterday there was a very inflammatory report on the situation in one of Pakistani channels,
which was denied,
and the Chinese denied it almost immediately. That is indicative that despite all this rhetoric, for the time being, they don't want matters to go out of hand, at least for the time being. But they will test our nerve, Nidhi, on that I am sure.
All right, well, let's see how this plays out. We could be in for a pretty long, drawn-out confrontation with China. As I told Mr. Ranade, we might see him here till the winter at the very least. His expertise on China, since he's had served there as well.